This is Sound and Vision from KEXP. I'm Emily Fox. We've been honoring Indigenous artists lately on the podcast, and here's the final artist I'd like to introduce you to.
I'm Elisapie. I'm a singer, songwriter, filmmaker, producer, mother, an Inuk woman, Indigenous woman from Saint-Louis, northern Quebec in the Arctic Canada.
She just put out a covers album in her native language of Inuktitut. It's filled with songs by Metallica, Fleetwood Mac, Cyndi Lauper, Queen, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and more. I caught up with her from a shaky Zoom connection as she started a show prep and production in Montreal, where she's been based for the last 2 decades.
My inspiration making this album was, I've just always wanted to make an album in my language, revisiting all these great big songs that will remind us a little bit of our past and how music had played a huge role to soothe us, to give us comfort and joy when we were going through hard times, because we have to know that Inuit in northern Canada anyway, we're nomads in the 60s still, so this is recent where we were forced to settle down to communities, what we call our community now, but we were nomads. We would go to a different place in the summer and in the winter. So this was our way of life, just a little, not so long before I was born. So I think by revisiting these songs, I was really thinking, this is going to be a gift to me, but also to my family. I also want to say thank you to these artists, just bring them in the North, because they were such a huge part of our lives. My uncle's rock band, Sugluk, were huge fans of Led Zeppelin, and I think we must say to Led Zeppelin, thank you for having been a friend. Thank you for having given me a voice or words when I couldn't even express them, because I was going through trauma with residential school, relocation, a man being told you have no more power, you have to follow the government now. I mean, it was such a harsh way of trying to lead our lives when we've always been, pretty good at doing that. So I think that's why I feel like the songs we chose, or I chose, for me, it's a way to just say thank you,
When I was reading about this album, you were talking about how, when rock music arrived in the 60s and 70s, that's also, I think, when your community was being taken away to residential schools. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about just that timeline? Because I think you also mentioned elsewhere that your mother, grew up in igloos. And so you're just a generation removed of that traditional lifestyle. So it seems like colonization happened a little later for your community than many other Indigenous communities. So can you talk about that timeline of when, you really started to see colonization within your community?
In the 40s, we started, I guess, more and more contact with white people. So 50s, it's still, Hudson Bay Company, fur trade, they start to explore the North a little bit more, but we're still very much isolated. Late 50s, 60s, that's when also federal government starts, realizing, okay, these guys have to be educated, they must be like, so that's when it really starts, but gradually. And in this late 60s, 70s, kids are pretty much sent to a residential school, usually nearby big town. In Inuit case, in northern Canada and in Quebec, they would just send them to Churchill, Manitoba, which is more the Hudson Bay. So it's, of course, south. And then these kids, some cases, kids from 5 to, especially indigenous communities here, it's 5 years old, 5-year-old children. I mean, I have kids, and I cannot imagine being put to a place where you are told your language is gone. Bye bye, mama, papa. Bye bye, the land. Bye bye, the freedom. Bye bye, everything. Bye bye, your childhood. So, in most cases, no, I don't know anybody who's gone to residential school who can say it was a very rich experience because at the beginning, what they told them is that, okay, parents, we're going to send your kids, but they're going to learn to be doctors and lawyers. So most of the time, this is non-existent. I think the first doctor happened very recently in the north. So it was not a great plan. Obviously, it didn't work. So we have a bunch of people like my uncles or my aunts at that, age of 55 and up, who just feel like they were trying to be given a chance to do something, but it didn't work. And then they also lost something. They lost the link that was so important to be raised by an Inuk and Inuk man, Inuk woman, who are the parents, because a lot of our teachings are by observing with very little words. It's observing, it's learning. And so a lot have been lost. And I think we just became very quiet and numb because there was not a lot of words to be shared. And of course, I think that's where social changes and social problems started. I'd say in the 80s, we never had, suicide before the 80s. And then it just became this huge problem. As a kid, as a teenager, I remember losing 3 cousins in a year, in the winter, to suicide. So it says something. And sometimes we also think, get over it. And I'm like, how can you get over something in one generation when in such a short time we just completely destroyed something? It did destroy us. And I'm not the type to say we are victims, but it did break something very big. It breaks something very deep. And so we're slowly realizing that we need to heal, as a community, as women, as men, as teenagers, and a lot of our older people are also realizing, oh, why the quietness, But it's sometimes a little too late. It's harder for parents to accept the teachings that they tried. Well, the teachings kind of stopped because they didn't have parents. They didn't have a family, they just had residential school. So when in the summer, when my uncles would arrive to Saint-Louis, to the towns, they brought the electric guitar, they brought the bell bottom. So that's why I find this is where we find joy when I think about, the old pictures that I would see or how they would talk. And I think that's why I got kind of obsessed with, that era, 60s, 70s, because I felt like, it was still so fresh. Everything was fresh and new, I wish we could just restart that in the right way, I guess. So maybe this album is kind of doing that for me, but it definitely made me cry. The new arrangements and to go back there to the songs like I Wish You Were Here, where we would just be quiet. And we actually stopped crying at one point because it was just too much pain, So I think it's time to cry again. And I think it's time to dance again too, because that is also a lot of songs in there that were dancey songs like Blondie. Yeah, it's a mix of those sadness but joy at the same time. They're all in this album.
That was my conversation with Elisapie about her latest album of covers called Inuktitut. That was Sound and Vision from KEXP. KEXP is a publicly funded radio station based in Seattle, and it is our fall fund drive where we remind you that KEXP is publicly funded. The majority of our funding we do comes from listeners. So we're asking, please help support shows like Sound and Vision with a donation at kexp.org/sound. And while you're there, check out our KEXP t-shirts and sweatshirts. You can get some swag if you donate. If you don't have the means to give right now, you can also help support the show by spreading the word about it. Share a favorite episode with a friend. Subscribe to this podcast, rate it, review it. Sound and Vision is made possible with human support, and you being a supportive human right now would mean so much. But most of all, thanks for listening.